Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading stories from the Mojave and other deserts. I hope you enjoy them. So now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. Mom, Grandpa, and toddler me were driving through rural West Texas at dusk. Mom noticed the road looked like it was moving, and something was crunching under the tires. She asked what it was. He told her that she didn't want to know. She insisted. My grandpa turned on the bright lights to reveal that it was a tarantula migration. I used to be a wildlife biologist for the United States Forest Service. I have come across most things that live in the desert. I haven't been intimidated by most until the day that I was out doing invasive grass surveys, and a swarm of killer bees moved the hive, flew past my partner and me. It looked like a dark cloud floating above the ground and sounded like a prop jet. Hands down, the most scared I've been in nature. My body flashed with heat, and I was completely frozen. When bees move, they all surround the queen in flight. If they had picked up on us as a threat, allergic or not, they could have killed both of us, easily. The most scary thing that I've seen out in the sands is probably the Salton Sea. From a distance and overhead, it looks like any other refreshing lake or reservoir, an oasis in the desert sands. But it is landlocked with no outgoing river, so the salts and minerals just keep building up every year. You head toward the beach. There is a beach of sand and ancient crushed-up shells, and the blueness of the water gets darker and darker until you realize that the blueness is just the reflection of the sky, and the water itself is black as tar, and the smell like rotten fish and spoiled eggs. There's dead fish everywhere, and flies. You don't even want to get close to the water nowadays. But if you did swim in it, you would float, because the salt in it is so concentrated. The Salton Sea is a trip. I was looking on an old map and saw a huge body of water in Southern California. Weird that I had been living out there for a few years and had never heard of it, so I drove out there. Apparently, there used to be resorts and such out there at one time. It was eerie seeing all of the abandoned buildings and such, but everything was cool until I went to the edge of the lake. The sand was crunchy. I looked down and there was not sand, but millions of dead fish bones. Maybe even billions. The entire shore was nothing but bones from dead fish. I looked out at the water. No waves. And realized why it was like that. Algae blooms. Apparently, the farm runoff goes into the Salton Sea and provides nutrients for algae to grow, and they take up all the oxygen in the water and kill off most of the fish. Something did move out in the water at one point, but the ripples were muted very quickly. I left the area while in a weird mental state. Humans really messed up that area really badly. One night, my friends and I got to the desert for a 2-night camping trip. On the way there, we were hit by heavy rainfall. By the time we got into the desert, it was cool and damp. We ended up going for a walk in the dark, and at one point, my friend says I can hear a snake. I say to him it just sounds like the wind. So he opens the flashlight, and right next to his feet there's a Palestinian viper curled up in a defensive pose. The snake has orange eyes under the light. Needless to say, we were lucky that no one trampled on the snake. This might not sound so scary until you've seen it in person, but I was out camping in the desert, and some idiot in the campground left a large cooler of beer unlocked. Javelinas got into the cooler and proceeded to get drunk on the beer. Wild pigs are not the nicest creatures, and when they get drunk, they don't get happy drunk. They get angry drunk. They rampage through the campground, tearing apart everything they could find, squealing like tortured banshees. They all collapsed in a heap in the middle of the campground, passed out. It was a very scary 10 minutes. I went to a park in the desert at 3 a.m. to get away from the lights and to try and see a meteor shower. I found darkness, got out of my car, can't see a thing, looking for shooting stars when I hear it. Clop, clop, clop. It gets louder and more frequent. Panicked, I get back in my car, turn the headlights on, and suddenly there is what sounds like a scream. Wild horses. I am surrounded by wild horses. They're everywhere. I didn't know that I was scared of horses, but invisible horses at 3 a.m. really freaked me out. Once, on a remote dirt road in Joshua Tree, I saw a decomposing rattlesnake in the road, so I pulled over to inspect it. It was 3 to 4 feet long and had been dead perhaps a week, so it was pretty much intact to tell its story. The snake had been run over, and I found him with his neck turned sharply, biting his body. I was in Butte Valley a few months after the Death Valley Germans disappeared, and explored some of the places they went. It was a shame because there were 2 well-equipped cabins they passed less than an hour walk where they could thrive for months if necessary. In the other direction, the wash is soft and sandy, and walking it was like walking down an escalator on the few steep parts. It intersects the road eventually, and the lights of the distant town of Shoshone are visible along the canyon as well. Instead, it turned out they made a grueling hike over an extremely difficult mountain range, expecting to run into guards patrolling the remote military base they saw on a map. It's actually a seldom used bombing range, protected by remoteness and inaccessibility. It's really remote out there, and occasionally spooky at night by yourself. Also in that area was the cabin where Charles Manson hid and was finally captured. The bathroom cabinet he was found hidden in was tiny, like the size of a laundry hamper. It made me think of those pictures of a little kid managing to get stuck inside a claw machine. The next time I went through the area, someone had pried this out of the tiny bathroom, leaving nails and holes in the plaster. Sometime after this, the whole cabin was burnt down. Very anticlimactic as Wild West famous places go. I've explored many interesting but quite dangerous mine shafts. An old silver and borax mine in the Calico Mountains had 2 to 3 foot trunks as timbers, holding up the hanging wall where the ore was removed. Over time, the weight caused a few of these to crush and splinter in the middle. There were 3 rickety 20-foot tall ladders to a lower level, which had rails and a low 5-foot roof. One time, I was taking my young teen nephews out to a remote but well-known desert canyon for a weekend of quadding and exploring. A ragged woman was walking down the road, which was almost a mile from the canyon mouth to the paved road. Not in distress, but apparently grown bored with whatever party was happening in the hills, and going to hitch a ride back to Barstow, where the party favors are never running low. There was no room to drive around her, so I slowed down and stopped a distance away. She kept walking toward the motorhome at the same pace till she got to the bumper and stopped, staring at me with her ragged tweaker face. After a longish minute, when I was wondering if I was going to have to get out and move her so we could continue, she got this determined look and started marching around to the passenger side. As soon as she was clear of the front, I gunned it and drove off, before she could start trying the doors. It was the most unexpected place to encounter a stereotypical, opportunistic, urban junkie. The scariest thing that I've seen out in the sands would honestly probably be what I call to this day the Mirage Man. Note, I wasn't living there, but broke down there. I was somewhere in the California desert when my friend's car died. Neither of us had smartphones, and even then there was no guarantee that we would have a signal. My friend wanted to walk. I said it was a really bad idea. He insisted, and I really didn't want to be left alone for who know how long without water. We started to walk, and every so often we would look back in case a car went by. It was perhaps only an hour after that we started walking that we started noticing someone off in the distance that appeared to be following us. My friend asked me if I should turn around. I thought this was too strange. We were in the desert while the sun was up, basically in the middle of nowhere. Why would someone else be walking? My friend wasn't entirely convinced and suggested the person might have struck his car and was also walking into tow. I pointed out that we had been walking for an hour, and this was the first we had seen of him. It was too monumental of a coincidence that someone could hit a parked car on the side of the road and catch up to us this fast. Long story short, we keep walking, but that figure is closing the distance. We were getting genuinely creeped out. We quickened up our pace as much as we dared in the heat, and every glance back the man was getting closer and closer. Not exponentially so, but noticeable. We found a truck stop not far off, and moved just shy of a jog to sit down and get water from the vending machines. My friend kept watching, and pointed out the man was now holding steady and not getting any further away or closer. My friend asked a driver for a ride after calling his motor club to bail him out. Our eyes were on the man, still there. We got the gas and kept our eyes on the man in the distance. The driver didn't see him. The closer we got to the dead car, now the further the man seemed to be. We made it to the car, with our pursuer nowhere to be seen. Never saw it again. My friend thinks that it was death itself, and had we not gotten to the truck stop, then it would have gotten us. I live on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It gets to 115 plus in the summers, so I like to go on long walks by the moonlight, in the early hours of the morning, out in the desert. I was at least 6 miles outside of town when this happened. I know, it's not the smartest, but I kinda like being alone out there. It kind of makes me feel a little more alive in a primal way. It's difficult to describe the feeling. Anyway, a few weeks ago I was out there doing my thing when I hear a screeching noise, like an inhuman high-pitched whining scream that slowly increased in pitch and volume. The source was within 10 or 15 yards. I fumbled around to turn on my phone's flashlight just in time to see a something's leg disappear into the brush. It was like that scene in Signs in the Cornfield where Mel Gibson's character shines his light around just in time to see the alien's foot disappear into the corn. I don't know what it was. I assume it was a tweaker or something, because I can't think of any animals in the area that sound like that. If it was a human, though, they would have to have been scrambling on all fours to be able to disappear into the sagebrush like that. Needless to say, I didn't stick around to find out exactly what it was. This was in Washington County, Utah, if anybody has any idea of what it might have been. My second best guess is a cougar, with severe nasal congestion. The scariest thing that's ever happened to me was the 7.3 Landers earthquake in 1992. We were only 2 miles from the epicenter. The experience was the scariest part, but seeing how much the road split, so much that we couldn't drive over it and had to turn around. Scariest event of my life. The sound was insane. We were in a one-room tiny cabin. It wakes us up. My friend's dad is yelling at us to take cover. It's so loud that we can't hear him, and he's only 15 feet away. We couldn't even stand up. The shaking was so violent. The sound was the loudest thing I've ever heard. After it stops, the front door is stuck and we can't open it. A neighbor came over and helped us get it open. We go outside and the surrounding valley is silent, with an eerie dust cloud hovering around the local vistas and boulder mountains. Basically small mountains that are piles of huge boulders. We pack up and get the heck out of there, and head home 3 hours away. We stop off the highway, which is between Palm Springs and the backside of Big Bear Mountain. We have a huge view of the mountain in the distance. Then a pretty big aftershock hits. Within seconds, the entire mountain becomes engulfed in a huge dust cloud from all the shaking. Later, we find out that huge boulders were being dislodged and bouncing down the mountain. We eventually got home. I had nightmares for a couple of months. I'd wake up screaming. I was only 15 at the time. I have PTSD from it to this day. I get so spooked if I even think that I feel the ground move. Even if it's a tiny earthquake, I have a panic attack and start crying. I was in the desert in southern Colorado, staying at the Great Sands Dunes National Park. There's a full view of the dunes from the campsites. It was really spectacular. I left my tent to go to the bathroom at maybe 10 p.m. It was summer, so hadn't been dark for very long. When I looked out towards the dunes, I saw what I can only describe as what looked like the circle of light that an old non-LED flashlight makes if you were to hold it up to a wall. Except it was huge and purple and more dim, as if the source of the light was very far away. I watched this giant circle of light cross horizontally over the dunes in a wavy motion, and then it disappeared. I know it sounds bizarre. I've seen a lot of weird things in my life, and this I have no explanation for. It wasn't an orb. It was seemingly flat against the dunes, and if it was being projected from a light source, I couldn't see where it came from. or how it would be possible, seeing as it covered about a quarter of the dune. So I've spent a lot of time in the desert, in addition to many other answers here relating to the flora and fauna and crazy people. I have one for you that I'm not sure I've posted anywhere before, and to this day, I still have no idea what it was. You see a lot of crazy stuff in the desert, but for me, this one took the cake. Story time. We used to go out camping on the weekends and sit around the campfire at night while rock climbing and hiking during the day. One particular night, some friends and I were hanging out on top of one of the nearby rocks before turning in for bed a bit a ways away from the campfire and tents. Just stargazing and chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, every single star in the sky rapidly moved and created a perfect circle, a ring of stars within a second. It stayed there for maybe 1 to 2 seconds, collapsed in on itself, then popped back to their own position in the sky. The few of us that were stargazing all collectively went whoa, and confirmed with each other that we just saw what we just saw. We never saw anything like that again. Never heard or read of any similar accounts. It was weird stuff. I feel like it is important to mention that none of us were under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, or whatever, since people I've told were like, "Oh my god, how high were you? You crazy desert people in your peyote." Like, nah dude, not my thing. Anyone who's spent long enough in the desert will tell you that there's lots of stuff you can see that's crazy to explain. Ball lightning, crazily behaving shooting stars, those scary moments when all of the coyotes just stop howling and everything gets dead quiet. It's eerie when that happens. The desert can be a loud place at night. Usually that means something bad is nearby, like a mountain lion or something. Over the years, I've seen lots and lots of strange things. Most are explainable or debunked, like how ball lightning is absolutely not a UFO, just spooky nature stuff. But that star circle thing was the only one that I can't really figure out. Bonus, if you ever get lucky, what's known as heat lightning in the desert is really cool to watch. Perfectly natural, but man, is it neat. I used to live out in the Mojave Desert, and my dad was taking us to the mall one day. We drove through Yermo, which is this tiny town. There's a whole bunch of abandoned houses there, a really good diner called Peggy Sue's, a high school, and a ghost town attraction. Well, my dad wanted to show us the dry lake beds out there, because we had never actually been on one before. So he drove out onto one, and it's about as exciting as you can imagine. Dry, cracked dirt. Well, we kept driving, and right before we were about to get on the road again, we came across something, and at first we couldn't tell what the heck it was. So we got out and went to look at it. It was a baby stroller, completely decorated head to toe with ribbons, beads, pinwheels, flowers, gems, etc. Totally decked out. Like, imagine a Mardi Gras float, but as a baby stroller. Not sure if it was the stroller of a baby that had passed away that was decorated in memoriam, or if it was an art piece, or maybe a homeless person's way of carrying around their belongings that they decorated. But it was just there all alone, drifting in the wind sometimes. I have a picture of it on my old Nintendo DSi. I wish I could share it here. Just imagine walking out there one night and seeing some big thing scooting across the lake bed, covered in stuff. I personally would crap my pants. The weirdest thing I've ever seen was when family friends from the Midwest visited us and wanted to see a real ghost town. None of that commercialized stuff. So after some research on my mom's end, we end up taking them to this ghost town that took a 4-hour drive in a tiny rental car up the side of a mountain with a sheer drop to get to. After an eternity, we get to this ghost town. It's on the top of this mountain, and it was tiny. It lived up to its name and looked real run down. It's so small that we basically can see the whole thing from the car. So we loop around and stop in front of this run-down house to decide if we will get out or just leave. Before we can really discuss it, this man in pants that were rolled down at the waist and rolled up in the pant legs so much that it looked like a diaper runs out of the house flailing his arms and yelling. He asks us what we're doing here, and we said we were looking for the ghost town. He perks up and says that it's $5 for admission, and then turns to me and my friend, who were both 12 at the time, and says, "Kids get in for free," with a menacing expression. He says us gals can go for a swim in his cement pond, and starts rambling about how great the pool is, especially on a hot day. We seem to be all in agreement that we would not like the tour or to swim in the pool, so we leave. We drive forward to see that the pool was actually a really small pond that was concretely green on the top. I was hunting in the northern part of the Red Desert, and after I killed my antelope in broad daylight, an extremely bright and fast-moving light approached me from several miles away, traveling faster than any land vehicle or drone could possibly move, flying low over the stage. It came within a quarter of a mile of me, then zoomed off in the other direction. Scared the ever-loving crap out of me. Haven't gone back out there alone since. No clue what I saw that day. This happened in the Sonoran Desert while I was 16 or younger. I was walking around right after sunset in my neighborhood and heard a loud squeal. In the small light, I saw a javelina staring right at me when I turned around. I was once out in a neighbor's Jeep off-roading as a kid and saw a jaguar or bobcat trying to chase us down as we were on a stretch of flat ground up against some hills. There's a part of the Salt River that we called Chalk City that's in an eastern suburb of Phoenix. I grew up in the neighborhood connected to a farm that owned the land next to it, so would often spend time in the river during dry seasons. One time, while exploring on the opposite side, where most people are, a group of people decided to start shooting at the side of the riverbed. I heard the bullets zoom right past above my head. Just laid down below a berm so I wouldn't get hit, and waited till they left, as I was just a 16-year-old at the time, and really scared. Another time, while at the Chalk City, my friends and I were exploring a small cave after dark when a group of coyotes started howling. They were getting closer and continuing to howl, so we booked it back towards the car a half a mile away. Even though we were running, they were getting closer, so we drove off like the Roadrunner. While driving at around 2 a.m. near a popular tubing area, a horse appeared out of nowhere as I drove over a bump in the road. I had to swerve at the last second. The horse couldn't have been in a less visible spot. And not technically a desert story, but as a kid there was a cornfield behind our house, and one of my friend's backyard was connected to it, so we spent a lot of time in it. There were also cattle on the other side of the neighborhood that had a citrus patch connecting. While in the middle of the field at midnight, we heard what sounded like an angry bull and saw the corn moving right by us. The second it started approaching us, we ran back to his backyard wall and jumped back over, nearly crapping ourselves. And to finish it off, there was a reservation across the street from my childhood neighborhood. The Salt River went through it, so we would often walk onto it. Saw a bunch of cops and a helicopter nearby, so we investigated, only to find out that 2 bodies were laying at the bottom of the dry river on the reservation. I build off-road rigs, Jeeps, that we take to Moab, Utah twice a year. Long story short, a buddy and I went wheeling one night towards this trail called High Dive. Mind you, he's on crutches with a broken foot. It's 3 a.m., we are by ourselves, and I flip the Jeep. We smash our radio antenna, and unfortunately the hood caved in due to the wreck and cracked our battery. No cell phone service. Jeep is dead in the water. I decide to start walking back to the nearest road by myself. Pitch black, and my phone is on 6%. Within a mile of the walk, I hear something. Something is running around me. I see light bars off in the distance, so I start jogging towards it. Every 30 seconds to a minute, I hear it again. I cannot tell for the life of me what it was. I finally make it to the road and start hauling butt at this point. A Suburban pulls up with some locals in it. I tell them the situation and I hop in and start going towards my Jeep. Once in the Jeep, I explain to them what I've been hearing. Their faces light up. We turn onto the dirt road that leads to the trailhead. And lo and behold, what's 50 to 60 feet in front of the car? A huge mountain lion. This thing has been sizing me up the whole 3-mile walk, and I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. I was on a field trip in the central Utah desert in 1999 during a Mormon cricket swarm. The road was a blanket of them. There was a tower of gulls, literally 10,000 of them circling in a massive tower hundreds of feet high, and they would periodically swoop down and gorge, only to vomit then get back up. Sometimes they'd be too full to fly. The crickets would swarm and eat them. The smell. Oh my God, the smell. We had to stop every 10 minutes or so to clean out the radiator. They completely clogged the fins. For context, hold out your thumb. Yes, that big. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm walking down a small mountain one night. They're scattered around town. I step on something in the dark that feels like a person's arm. Then I hear the rattle. Oh God, I'm about to be bitten by a rattlesnake. I can't run. The terrain is walkable with care, but a guaranteed fall otherwise. So I keep walking, waiting for the bite. But I never ended up getting bitten, after all. This happened to me a few years ago. I live in Arizona, by the way, in the mighty Mojave. I was on my patio, having just finished dragging 2 full trash cans of weeds and dead branches from my backyard. My dog, my little buddy, was, as usual for him, following me around like my shadow. It was a nice, clear crystal blue day in early May, when it's not too hot and not too cold, and I was feeling pretty good. I became aware of a car pulling up in my driveway, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that it was a big black SUV. At first, I thought it was an aunt of mine, the only person that I know with one. I'm a little surprised by the sudden visit, but whatever. I scoot the trash cans off to the side of my gate and then turn to wave, suddenly stopping. It's at this point that I see the word sheriff written on the side in big red letters. Immediately, I start wondering if I had done something illegal. I was fairly certain that I hadn't, and that's when the thought that something happened to my mom and grandma popped into my head. They were both out at a casino that day, and now I start worrying that there was an accident, or maybe a carjacking. Then the deputy gets out. I see on his face a very large grin, and that threw me off. I approach my gate and quiet down my little buddy, who started growling, as he always did whenever someone or something started to come onto the property. He approaches the gate, and I politely greet him. "Hello there, officer. How can I help you?" I say, trying to keep a cool exterior, while internally I am frantically trying to think of a reason as to why he would be here. "Hello, sir," he said, still grinning. "Do you live here?" "Yes, sir," I answer. "And are you the only person who lives here?" he asks me. I'm still very nervous and confused, but I answer him. "Yes, sir." "We got some calls of complaints about someone at this address," he explains. I was thrown through another loop, as I had not been expecting that being the reason. I generally keep to myself, and I don't do things like shoot off fireworks or make a lot of noise, so I couldn't imagine what I could have done to warrant someone calling the cops on me to complain. While this had been confusing enough already, I was sorely unprepared for what the officer had to say next. "Yeah, we got a call from one of your neighbors that someone at this address, matching your description, has been climbing on the roof and firing a microwave gun into their head in order to change their thoughts." I stand there for what felt like a full 30 seconds, letting what he said sink into me. "What?" I asked after it had sunk in, not comprehending what I had just been told. He was still smiling, and it was now dawning on me that he was actively trying not to laugh, hence the smile, as he calmly repeated what he had said. I then asked him to repeat himself a third time, to which he complied, and my brain finally was able to accept this new piece of information. Several sets of new neighbors had been moving into the area, and one of them was a very, let's say, odd man. We'll call him Weirdo. Well, Weirdo had just moved into his house at the end of the street with his sister. At first he seemed nice, if maybe a little bit too friendly. After creeping me and a bunch of people out with the weird things he would say, usually about his knife collection, he had gone and said some very gross sexual things to my mom, who at the time had been working as a cashier at the general store. She almost tossed him out right then and there. His sister I felt bad for, because she was constantly going around town apologizing for the things that he would say and do. Anyways, I just knew that Weirdo had been the one to call and complain about me using an imaginary ray gun on him, because that seemed in the ballpark of things that he would do. The officer told me that he was required to ask me if I had a microwave gun anywhere on the property. At that point in time, part of his job was to ask me if I was in possession of an imaginary ray gun. In a very calm voice, I said, "No, sir. I don't even know what a microwave gun would even look like." "Neither do I," he said, shaking his head, letting slip a chuckle. "But I had to ask. And I have to ask you to please refrain from using one in the future." It was at this point that his composure slipped some more, and he started to laugh outright. While part of me did find it very funny as well, and I still do, a more pragmatic part of me started to worry about Weirdo and his delusions involving me. I know that the vast majority of people with mental illnesses are not going to harm anybody, but this dude was constantly going on about his knives, and how apparently he had some kind of fixation on me. I found it more unnerving than anything. Once the officer had regained his composure, yet was still smiling, he informed me that he could not tell me who it was that called in, but that he felt that I should be aware of them. I told him that I had a pretty good idea of who it was and pointed down the street toward Weirdo's house. He stopped me and said that he was going somewhere else on the street and that I really should pay attention as to where he goes next. I nodded, and after he got back in his vehicle and backed out, I watched and waited for him to go to Weirdo's house. He doesn't. He pulls into the driveway of the house right across the street from mine. I am absolutely dumbfounded, as the man who had moved in I had never spoken 2 words to or even met before. Out of some weird instinct, I ducked down a peek out through the lattice next to my gate, not wanting to be seen. The officer pulled in and got out of his SUV. He walked right up to the front door and knocked. Instantly, just as he pulled his hand away, the door was wrenched open, and out comes the owner, screaming his head off. I couldn't quite understand what he was screaming, just that it was something along the lines of, "You can't be here." I was amazed by the composure of the deputy. He remained calm as this lunatic was screaming right in his face, and was trying to calm him down. As soon as the guy was calmed down, he cussed at the officer, then stormed back inside and slammed the door behind him. I was afraid that he was going to look back in my direction, so I had ducked down behind my fence, which my little buddy took to mean that I wanted to play. The officer drove off, and I had heard nothing else about any complaints. Well, the next day, after I had told my mom about this, she went and spoke to her friend who was the real estate agent that sold him the house. For those who don't already know, my mom pretty much knows everyone in town. This is how she told me the conversation went. "You know that house that you sold across the street from my son?" "Yeah." "Did you know that you sold it to a lunatic?" "Oh my God, what did he do now?" I can't help but feel like either I or my mom, i.e. her friend, should have gotten a phone call or something, just a casual heads up. Apparently, this guy had a bit of a reputation in the local real estate community, at least from what my mom's friend hinted. I mean, I respect other people's privacy, but come on. Just by the way, your new neighbor might be slightly mentally ill or something. Well, not a full week later, I'm in my car, driving home from the grocery store. I'm nearing my street, and I smell some smoke, and my thought process was along the lines of, "Oh, someone's grilling. I think I'll start thawing and marinating some steaks and throw them on the grill tomorrow." Well, as I'm driving up my street towards my house, I see the lunatic standing in his front yard, spraying his house with his garden hose. I just write it off as him being odd, but then I see my mom in my driveway frantically waving. I pull in to see what was happening and look behind me, now seeing the flames. I don't know how my eyes just kind of glazed over the smoke rising from his house, but I could see it now. My mom had seen it and came running, worried that it was my house, and then seeing that it wasn't, worried that the main gas line would ignite and blow up. The fire department shows up, I think 10 minutes later, and get to work on it, but the house is not salvageable. He did, before they show up, started running in and pulling stuff out and set it down in his front yard, going back in and repeating this multiple times. I counted 3 rifles and a handgun, and lots of ammo being amongst the pile in his front yard. Before the fire department arrived and one of the firefighters made him stop. I wasn't listening to what they were saying, as I was hiding behind my fence again. I was terrified that this guy was going to jump to the conclusion that the guy with the microwave gun, whom he had called the police on, had simply talked to him and nothing else, might have had something to do with this. It was later discovered that an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. The house burnt down almost completely to the ground. There were some walls and ceilings still kind of standing, but it was completely unsalvageable. The guy moved away, and I didn't hear anything more about him. That was definitely one of the craziest things to happen to me out here, and definitely in my top 10. When I was a young child, we lived in a very sparsely populated part of the Mojave Desert called Lake LA. When I was around the age of 3, my mother would often be awoken at night to hear me crying. First, let me explain the layout of my room, because this is relevant later. My room was in the front of the house, with a big window facing the front yard. Opposite the window was a closet with mirrored sliding doors. My bed was directly under the big window facing the front yard. Anyway, when my mom would come into my room to see why I was crying, I would tell her that there was an Indian in my closet. She thought that it was just me having nightmares, and she would comfort me until I fell back asleep. One night, the same thing happens. She hears me crying in the room. This has happened multiple times, with me claiming to see the Indian. One night when she enters my room, she sees a native man looking through my window. I was seeing his reflection in the closet door opposite the window. He ran off, and the encounter stopped. My mom reminded me of this years later when I was a teenager. I recounted the story to a friend who grew up in the same area of the desert, and she said that both her and a friend had the same experience of a native man looking in their window. Was he just a creepy guy, or something else? Was he planning on abducting me? I live in a small town in Arizona. It's in the Mojave Desert, and it is beautiful. Sparse, wide open spaces, but just gorgeous. At least to me. When I was 15, I was walking my dog in the summer at 9 in the morning. I was followed by a big white truck. It looked a little beat up. But at first, I just figured that it was someone new to town and lost. I stopped and waited for them to pull up to next to me, presumably to roll down the window and ask me for directions or something. But no, they just stopped and stayed there. I was creeped out, but I was on my street, so I figured I could just go home and call the cops if something happens. I keep walking. My dog is just happily jogging about, marking his territory with glee. As I turn us into our driveway, the car speeds up and pulls right up next to me. The window rolls down, and a man with a brown beard and sunglasses on leans over the passenger seat to shout at me. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked a very confused me. "Just taking my dog for a walk," I said. "Why are you doing it so early?" "Because I don't want him or myself to die from heat stroke. I had a tendency to be a bit of a smart butt when I was a teenager, but I was being sincere when I said that. Here in the Mojave, temperatures in the summer can reach the mid to high 120s later in the day." "You visiting someone?" That just threw me off. I'm going home," I said, pointing to my house. He just stares at me without saying anything for a few moments. "I've never seen you around here before," he said. "I've lived here for about 10 years now," I said, starting to feel equal parts creeped out and annoyed. He didn't seem to like that. "I'll be checking that. We keep an eye out for suspicious individuals here," he said. "Good for you," I said. I was not being sincere when I said that. I just started walking up my driveway, looking back to see that he was watching me the entire time. I pulled out my keys and opened the door and led my little buddy inside. I shut and locked the door behind me. My mom had already been up doing some work on the roof. Again, mid to high 120s in the middle of the day, and was just taking a break. I told her what happened and she was furious. She grabbed her hammer and walked out the front door and down the driveway, but the weirdo was gone. Not a full 5 minutes had to have passed before the phone started to ring. We always let the answering machine get it. It was someone from the neighborhood watch, notifying us that a suspicious individual was spotted on our property. My mom picked up the phone and hit the talk button and laid into the guy. She demanded to know why some freak was following her 15-year-old child around, and she used a lot of colorful language, similar to if she stubs her toe, so a lot of blank sucker and mother blankers spewed forth. She told me the guy stammered a bit again and said that he was with the neighborhood watch. She told him that if anyone ever was following her boy again, she was going to drag them out by their blanky truck and bash all of their teeth in with a hammer. Please bear in mind that normally my mom is very warm and bubbly. She just likes to make sure someone who messes with her children knows why that's a very bad idea. She then hung up and called her friend. She knows everybody in town, who was essentially in charge of the neighborhood watch, and much more calmly explained the situation. Turns out that a new guy moved to town recently and was very adamant about finding out if there was a neighborhood watch. When he heard that there was, he was very excited and joined at the very first opportunity. Apparently, he thought that he was actually a member of law enforcement, as he hadn't been a member more than a month and already had gotten 7 complaints prior. I guess he had seen a teenager and thought troublemaker or something. Granted, I have been told before that I look sinister, but still. He was kicked out of the neighborhood watch regardless, although I think that there were more call-ins to complain about him. So, to the overzealous law enforcement wannabe, let's not meet again. This story happened over 20 years back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit with my friends, being allowed to drive by myself for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together, until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m., with the caveat that if I was running late for any reason to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me and my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no streetlights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars are still pretty common in that area, stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited, and as a 30 to 40s man started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, or not realizing that it's a desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway trying to find help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he came abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead. I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help him out. I asked if his car was a stick shift, which it was, so I asked if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes, so I agreed to, as gently as I could, push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues, specifically to get it somewhere to work on it. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Push starting the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get back out and thank me, then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them. I decline. They pull off to the side of the road, and I continue on my way. Only they start following me. So here I am. It's 9:50 at night. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from getting home and getting away from my friend's house. These drunk, creepy older guys have started to follow me on a road without any man-made light except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turn down a road that I know gave me a couple turnoffs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, oh crap. I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop around back to the station, and they follow me again. So at least I know that they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up right behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and then floor it. The wheels dig into the rocks and poof dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the leadway, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in light from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know that I couldn't see him behind the counter. He was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So, to the two drunk idiots that wanted to mess around with me, a 16-year-old on my first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.